Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And a good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. You are with The Alignment Show once again. We appreciate you being here. My name is Don King. I am your host, and we have another guest lined up this week to talk about living your values and value your life. As we get started, got some news to share on the personal front. We've been talking about the way of the 3-year-old why for several months now. The follow-up is just about ready, and I'm looking for had a little bit of tech issue this morning, so I'm a little pushed here, but I want to share with you the link down here for getting the first scene from the upcoming book. The name of that book is Medium Well. I can even show you the cover. It just got released this week. So this is the new cover for the new book. So if you would like to see what that is about, then for those of you listening, you can go to donking.com. That's DONNKING.com/medium well first. Spell out the word first, and you'll be able to see the first scene from Medium Well. But with that, I am pleased to be able to introduce you to our guest for today. His name is Kevin O'Connor, and Kevin and I were going through, as I said, some tech stuff, so I've turned away from the material that I had lined up to properly introduce him. But one of the things that really fascinates me about Kevin is how many things he has done in his life. He is an author. We're going to be talking about his book. But the book is based on his experiences growing up. He's been a principal. He's hearing me right now. So, Kevin, I'm going to ask you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, because you've got a standard way that you introduce. But this is going to be a fascinating conversation, folks. Let's go ahead and get Kevin O'Connor on stage. Kevin,
Hey,
welcome to the Alignment Show.
Don, I appreciate it. I appreciate this time, this opportunity to be with you, and the conversations email-wise and text-wise, and this morning that we've had. I appreciate that. I'm here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I've lived since 2007. Prior to that, though, I was. You said I had have quite a few experiences, but I think that's part of being almost 74 years old. It's hard to avoid experiences when you get into the septuagenarian stage of life. And I think you asked about my position statement in one of our email dialogues. And I think what I came up with and talked about was that I'm blessed to reach this stage in life. When I go to my college and high school reunions, I'm often aware of the people that aren't there because they haven't had the fortune to be there. I'm talking about the ones that aren't there because they've passed on.
Yes.
But I feel blessed, and to be at this stage in my life, I savor it. I welcome the opportunities I have and value my experiences. I'm always, not usually, I'm always a cup half full, probably closer to 3/4 full person. So that's helped to guide me in my choices and my decisions and the things that I do. Not that there haven't been challenges,
Right.
certainly those, but I think in some of the other questions you posed, I was reminded of Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. There's certainly roads I've taken, certainly roads I haven't. And my tendency is to whatever road I take, don't think about the one I didn't take. Just proceed. Sometimes that road gets taken because I've chosen it. Sometimes factors choose it for me. But in any case, I'm not a don't look bad person. I certainly value memories and value those kind of things, but I don't look back to say, hey, what if I'd done that instead? I don't think that does me any good. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's a little bit of introduction, and again, thanks for having me here today.
Well, glad to have you on here. I relate to a lot of what you're saying. I am coming up on that seventh decade pretty soon myself. In
Hmm.
fact, my 50th high school reunion is coming up in October. So,
Oh, have fun. We just had our
yeah,
55th last July. So, yeah,
wow.
there I treasure reunions, and some people aren't as crazy about them as I am, but I help plan them sometimes and get involved, and I like doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we're going to be talking quite a bit about the book here today, and so I want to go ahead and show that to folks here because you can, you can tell a lot about a book by looking at the cover.
Okay, yeah.
And so let's just see, share screen. Oh, did I close that down? Yeah, I did. When in doing the stuff. Nope, nope. There it is. Shoot, Chrome tab. Why are there? It's like running a starship sometimes,
Oh,
Kevin.
isn't it? Yeah, you are. Yeah, there it is. You are you're pretty good. You're very good at this stuff. Thank you for doing your expertise.
Well, I determined long ago that I wanted to be in charge of it instead of it being in charge of me.
Yeah, that's a good decision. Good
Yeah.
decision.
But I mean, this is a great cover on this, and
Thank
and
you.
good subtitle. Two
Thank you.
floors above grief. That's an intriguing title.
Mm-hmm.
And then a memoir of two families in the unique place we called home.
Yeah.
And I loved this paragraph. I'm doing this for the folks who are on audio only or not seeing the website.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, for those listeners, especially, it says as a child in the 1950s, Kevin O'Connor knew his house was different than his friends. A stately three-story 19th century Victorian. His bed tucked next to a stage in a former ballroom. His uncle and aunt lived with their three daughters on the floor below, a large electric organ in a corner of the first floor mortuary business, stacked caskets, and an embalming room in the basement. So we're looking at 4 levels there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody had a house like his. Oh, wow. That is such a sense of place there.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
yeah, yeah. How old were you when you realized that you were living someplace different than your friends?
Oh, well, I was born in 1950. As I say in the book, there's a good chance I was likely conceived in the same building where people were being waked and funeraled. And the first flight, I never had any uh, verification from my parents. You know, sometimes kids don't
Oh,
ask their parents that.
oh
But
no.
anyway, when I was born, I was brought home to this house that's on the cover of the book. This Victorian house built in 1886, and I never knew any different. I never. So when did I first realize it? Probably, I have vague memories of things that I have a vague memory of being in my crib once, probably part made up, part real. But then also times when I was just oftentimes to come in and out of the house with our family, we would walk through the first floor, walk through the funeral home. So I was really aware at a young age that of the concept of what the house was for and what my uncle and my dad did as in professionally. So I'd have to say preschool years was I was first starting to have a concept of what this was and what it was to not only live, but what it was to die and what that meant and what it meant for the people who my father and my uncle were helping at the time. So yeah, and to answer your question, I knew about it from a very young age, very young
Right,
age.
right.
Right, even
And
yeah.
what I'm thinking about it is how would I put this? Um, in a way it wasn't unusual at the time for people to live above their businesses or whatever.
Mhm.
But America was shifting more towards suburban kind of houses, one level ranches, and all that. And so you would go to your friends' houses and say, well,
Mhm.
this is different. Where's your business?
Yeah,
And so there would be a dawning at some point that, I'm living in unusual circumstances compared to most people.
yeah,
And I get, fairly obvious that you would have an early awareness of death and the nature of death, something that our culture tends to kind of hide or hide from.
mhm.
Did And I'm going to make a little sideways comment here. I grew up in a little West Tennessee town. population of about 8,000 people. And some of my friends were the folks who owned the local funeral home. This was
Sure.
back before the consolidation of the industry,
Yeah.
so it was very much as you describe an old. I would guess the house was probably built in the same time period that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't tend to go visit over
Mhm.
there, you know. And
Uh-huh.
so
Uh-huh.
did your friends come to the house,
Oh, yeah.
private living area? And
No, and part of the story that I tell in the book is just how my aunt and uncle, my mom and dad, they sort of uh, there's they normalized it.
Mhm,
They normalized where we lived. They normalized the atmosphere. Our apartments were above, of course, where the funeral was, an entrance that my friends would come through. The family entrance. They would use that to get there. And and so, yeah, it wasn't uncommon for my brothers and I to have our friends over. We had sleepovers. We had a basketball hoop in the backyard. We had play areas. The neighborhood's kids came over, or school friends came over. I went to their houses. The whole concept of sleepovers and doing things with playing was normal to my friends too. Some of them we still talk about it. How they were as welcome at my house, my apartment, and they knew my uncle. My aunt and uncle knew them. They were as welcome at our house. I call it a house, not a funeral home. They
mhm,
were as welcome at our house as I was at theirs. So it was a very and part of what I bring out in the book is how my dad and uncle really separated the business part from the family life. They had a pride and they developed trust in their clients, and part of that trust was due to their discretion, and due
mhm,
to their discretion in keeping the matters of the client's business to themselves. So dad, I have very little memories, probably none of dad bringing the stories of the business and the families up to our apartment. Certainly, I knew he was busy, and I certainly knew I might have known the name of the people, and even maybe knew the person who had passed, but I didn't know um, necessarily all the intricacies of death. People ask me, "What was it like? What did you know?" I said, "I really didn't know much
mhm,
about the business because I I was more than an observer. I consider myself an ambassador of the funeral home, but I didn't. Dad and Uncle Lawrence just kept it secret. And the older I get, the more I find out. Even in writing the book, and since I wrote the book, the more I find out about their approach. I just My respect for them increases. So
mhm.
a long answer to your question. One of my friends welcome in the house. Yeah, we did a lot of social things together, and my friends also helped. When my dad would need when he was had a case where the deceased didn't have family, or might have been a homeless person, or a person who didn't have anybody to come. Dad needed pallbearers, so when I was a teenager in school, he would even in early college, he would call me and say, "Hey, get your friends over here. Um, Come on over. They can be pallbearers." And so and he taught us. He taught us together, my friends as well. Some of them still talk about, just how he guided us and what we learned in that. And in my friends are very much included in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a part of life.
Hmm.
The curiosity, is the funeral home still operating? I mean, this is
Hmm.
many years ago, so.
Yeah, I can give a little background there. My family owned the business from 1930 at two different locations. The one I talk about in the book mostly is the one that's pictured on the front cover. They owned it, so they owned the business and were established in the business from 1930 to 1984. That's when my dad died. For only 71. So it was in the process of being sold as he was getting through his last months of cancer. But and then since that time, the funeral home has gone maybe one, two, three, maybe different owners, but the
Mhm,
funeral home is still in existence. Same building. So now a gentleman named Tom Leitz has the funeral home, and he, like people that were prior to him, since the business was sold, it's now Leitz O'Connor Funeral Home in Elgin. So it's now in the 94th year of business.
Wow.
So 6 years from now, the business will have been established in the town for 100 years, and I'm pretty proud. Not pretty. I'm very proud of what my uncle and dad started and the longevity and the legacy that it has had. So it's
Indeed.
still a business. Mm-hmm.
And as part of that curiosity question, not passing judgment on the trends in the industry or whatever, but as we have kind of alluded to already, independent family-owned funeral homes are kind of a rarity these days. It used to be the standard, but it's kind of rare, and so it's still independent or small local chain or.
Well, I have some recent data on that. I don't have it in front of me. I'll do it from memory. I gave a presentation yesterday, an online presentation, to a group that provides training and professional development for people in death care industry. We had about I think almost 1,000 people signed up. I think 700 were in attendance, and part of that was some polling, and part of it was how I related my experiences about living in the actual building, and then with the people that on the particular session yesterday, very a lower percentage now, probably less than 50%, live with it, in the vicinity, and that was not the case in my father's time, and most of his colleagues lived right in the funeral home, and certainly it was you needed to do that because prior to the conveniences we have now with telephones, and I mean, our funeral home was way before beepers. Our funeral home started in the area when all the telephone calls had to go through an operator. So I mean, that was so many changes happening at the time. Somebody needed to be on the premises. Somebody needed to be there, not for sure when there was a wake or a funeral, but also if the phone was to ring and somebody had died, you need to go help the family. Or my dad and uncle also had an ambulance service, and it was tied into the police department. So when there was they had to be ready to go. So there was very few times that my dad and uncle, one of them was there in the house all the time. If they had to scoot away, then my aunt or my mom would and take care of things as quick as they could. So, but back to your question, yeah, certainly many changes in the industry. Man, dad and Uncle Lawrence came in at a time when funerals were just starting to move to funeral homes. In the early part of the 20th century, funerals and wakes were held in the house of the deceased, and around in the 20s and 30s, people started to make a move, say, let's put these in one place. Family doesn't have to deal with having that grief right in their own house. And that's part of the history of how funeral homes got started. And the proprietor, in this case, my dad and uncle, lived right close by. But as I said, just and yesterday with the polling during this presentation, I learned from them that a lot of them don't live on the premises. They live away in a house of their own or a location of their own. And they probably, and in some of the bigger places, they probably have scheduled hours that they go. They're assigned the time they're on duty. It wasn't the case with Dad Lawrence. They're on duty 24/7, 365 days a year. So that's certainly a difference in the way the industry's changed.
So it's phone calls at 2:00 in the morning, not unusual, of course.
That was part of my at home. Hear the ring and learn over a period. I would just learn to fall back asleep, but the phone would ring. I'd hear my dad. He'd leave the house, and I'd just go back to sleep. So
that was just the way that that life went. I could see that. I'm thinking about right now, if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you did not then go into the family business. You went into education as a career.
Right.
And teacher, principal, there's all kinds of stuff that you do in that area as well.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm I'm curious, as you looked at writing this book, which is
Okay.
kind of what we're focusing on right now. What brought you to writing?
Hmm.
What brought you to writing about that instead of, say, a memoir of your observations as being a principal? Because I know there's all kinds of stories there.
Oh, I've got some books in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what led you to go back to this memoir and to now be speaking once again to the funeral industry and all that sort of thing?
Great question. Each of our lives has journeys, you know.
Yeah.
I remember walking a beach in South Carolina with some college friends and our families in 1993, and we're then at 93, 43 years old, thinking about, hey, what's our next? What do we want to do with our life? I said, I want to write a book. What do you want to write a book about? I don't know. I just want to write a book. Um, so at that time, I was in the midst of getting my doctorate and writing a dissertation. So, and being in the education profession, I was no stranger to writing. And even going back to elementary, high school days in college, I would gravitate to things where I would be put in a position of writing. I've always enjoyed that part. So, what made me to do this book? Part of it was we talked a little bit about the cover, I think, and the background. But part of it, and I think I might have mentioned before, that the book is based on 700 pages of letters that were written back and forth between my parents and I, and uncle, mostly from 1969 to 73. But some of the letters go back to the 30s, and through the passage of time, I had a lot of the letters just because I kept them myself, but then other family, hey, I found this letter from your dad or so and so. I became the keeper of the letter. So as I was finishing up my career, the last 5, 6 years of my career in education, I sat down. What am I going to do with these letters? And so I figured out a way to organize them, and have started to teach some seminars on how to organize family letters.
Hmm.
But I did that and developed a way for me. And I said, now what am I going to do with these? Because I was, as I organized them, I was reading them again, and I started to see the characters of my mom and my dad and my aunt and uncle, my cousins, my brothers come out. And I thought, this is an important story for our family. But then as I started writing, so what the motivation then was to start writing. And even though I'd written a lot of educational type writing, I thought, well, this memoir stuff's a little different, nonfiction. So I met with a person and was fortunate enough to get into a program called Nonfiction School, nonfictionbookschool.com. Stacy Ennis and her program, and the colleagues that she worked with, we had about 10 people in our cohort over a period of 5 months, and just guided me through the steps that it would take to get these ideas together. So I met, and she and her team kept motivating me to keep going. In fact, the title of the book came from one of our sessions. This is as the other authors and I brainstormed. That's where the title came from. That was an exciting day. Um, but and then I just kept going, and with Stacy, I started working with another group called My Word Publishing, and they guided me, and still do, with how do you publish a book? How do you get it onto Amazon? How do you get your cover design? That's where the cover person. They direct me to some editors that did some 2 or 3 edits. So the motivation was I had all these letters, I had all these stories in my head. As you started this, when did I first learn? I learned at a preschool age. So the stories were there, the relationships with my friends were there, and my family, and I thought I want to write this, and I thought I put this in paper. Well, now it's on paper and audio and Kindle, so I'm gonna put this down, and then it just takes, not just, I don't. I'm trying to get the word "just" out of my vocabulary because nothing is ever simple. Nothing is ever as simple as just do this.
True,
No.
true. Yeah.
So I just decided then I was going to discipline myself. I set myself, now that I was fully retired from my educational position, I had time. I had fewer excuses for not to do this. And but at the same time, in order to get it done, I put 5 days a week at 4 or 5 hours a day that I just focused on whatever step I was at in the process. And that's what really just kept propelling me to get it all done and finished.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, when you go back and listen to this, you will hear that we've got a little tech issue still. There's sounds breaking up, but
Oh,
I think people are going to
on this.
be able to follow it. We're getting about 80% of it, so they're going to get it.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I'm not hearing it all on my end. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So and it may be my connection. The recording may be just fine. We'll find out.
Okay.
But
All righty.
I did want to ask, as because I was taking some notes for the show notes. Say again, it was nonfictionbooksomething.com.
Oh yeah. It's all probably one word. Nonfictionbookschool.com.
Okay,
And
all right.
the proprietor, the person who started this and has been doing it for 10 or 12 years now, her name is Stacy Ennis, Ennis. Just great program, and she and I have a relationship in this, and I've been starting to do some other kind of work together to help writers succeed in their efforts to get a book written and published.
Very good, very good. In fact, as you're working in the memoir genre, that is a very interesting genre in and of itself. It is nonfiction, as you say, but it also has its issues or challenges, I guess I would say, because you're bringing in other people's lives.
Right.
And there is still the need to tell a good story. You're not twisting the facts, but you do have character and scene setting and inciting incidents and all of those kind of things that we would see in a good fiction book. Very different from academic writing, as you mentioned.
Oh yeah, very much so.
So what would you say was your biggest obstacle to overcome in writing that type of book?
Okay, the memoir, right?
Yeah.
The biggest obstacle is part of sort of what I've sort of addressed before was just the discipline, getting it done, and knowing the importance of having a routine. Certainly, I had routines in my profession, but those hours, those times a day was set by a school system for your school day and whatever responsibilities I had for meetings or evening type stuff that was set by my profession. So I followed those schedules. Once I got on my own, I needed to set my own schedule. I wanted to keep some routine. So what could have become an obstacle, I made it work because I committed myself. I look at for me, I had to look at the long game, and I had to look at what is my goal here? What is my mission? What is my position and my value? And I said, hey, after all this time, I want to get this book written. What do I need to do to get to it? And taking the classes, being an educator, I'm never averse to taking classes. So, because I can always learn from other people. And taking those classes, I didn't support me and just said, do this. And I just figured, and I listened. Okay, if you're telling me to do this, it's worked for other people. I'm going to do it as well. The same thing I would have done as a teacher when I was teaching second grade. Hey, do it this way, and you'll get to where you want to be. So I think education background helped me to overcome the obstacles that I could have put up or could have let stand there in my writing process. But I just kept at it, and kept the discipline going.
Wow. And your first book of this sort, and let's give a little bit of. I'm bumbling to say 4 or 5 things at once here, Kevin. And it's not working very well. We have focused on the book and what's behind this book and all this kind of thing. And I said starting out, it amazes me how much Kevin has done. His other writings include a dissertation, articles, anthologies. Okay, he provides training in university and professional settings. As you can tell, I found the material here. He's guested on more than 20 podcasts. He resides in Fort Lauderdale with his husband, Leon. You have done advocacy for LGBTQ, the professional education stuff. There's so much more that we could talk about. But
I'll come back.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to need to do that. So I had asked about the next project, and you've got more books coming. And I've turned it. There's the beginning a second book. So is it going to be a different kind of book? What are
Well, I
you in
got
the
a
middle?
couple, yeah. And being a writer, enjoying the writing process, and having all these stories and swim and diving in my head, um, I got to pick one to start with next. So I'm going to building on what I've got right now with this Two Floors Above Grief. I'm going to focus on additional letters that are in my collection and stories from my parents and myself. How does an undertaker, and this came up in my discussion yesterday with the industry, what is an undertaker? What is a funeral director? They are nowadays, they might be called death care professionals.
Hmm.
What do they do to get? What do they do to handle their own grief? They take on the burden, of family's grief, and they help that family get through. But they take on that grief. In addition, a funeral, a person in the industry isn't removed from having those personal experiences in their own life. So what does a person do for their physical, mental, and emotional health? Well, one
Hmm.
of the things my family did is took vacations, and it might have been just you know a 2 week trip to a cabin in Wisconsin or something, or my aunt and uncle would take road trips and drive around. But it was just a way to get away from the. I have a collection of letters. I have a collection of. So the next book's going to be, instead of Two Floors Above Grief, the tentative title is Navigating from Grief. And
Uh-huh.
what was my experience with my own family about how my dad and my uncle, my aunt and mom handled the grief that was surrounding them. Even though the business was on the first floor, you couldn't help but tune in a little bit to whatever that particular family was going through. Of course, my dad and my uncle knew it intimately. I knew just because I might have known the family or a little bit of the story behind the sadness that went with it, what the family was going to do, those kind of things. So, what does an undertaker do? They navigate from grief. So that's my next book that I'm working on, and then I have other related things to my profession. Um, It'll still be a nonfiction area, but I want to do things that tie in professionally to my 50 years of experiences as an educator. What it was like as a principal, a teacher. I want to get into what is it that kids remember about their teacher or their classroom.
Hmm.
So I had my first students in 1974. Um, so I'm endeavoring to get a hold of as many students as I can through social media and say, what do you remember about our classroom? What do you remember about me? I might relate to them. I remember my own education, and for me, it's just a little glimmer of this teacher and that teacher, and that's all I expect people to remember.
Mhm.
But still, I'd like to know what stuck for those kids.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so once I get this Navigating from Grief book, and I may work on this concurrently, doing some research to get all of my former students, not only when I was a teacher, but during the 21 years I was a principal. What is it that kids, now that they're adults, some of them in their 50s and 60s, what do they remember? What did they take away? What triggers their memory? And probably good thoughts in there, not so good thoughts, whatever. And I
Hmm.
want to use that book as a way to provide some resources for people that are currently in the education profession. So that's next projects that are percolating right here in my head. Um, that's what I'm working on next.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm not going to stand up to show it, but the T-shirt that I'm wearing right now says, "I'm a writer. I make the voices in my head work for me." And
Oh,
so
wow. Hmm.
sounds like you are harnessing those voices very effectively.
Yeah, I have a, if you see my
Yeah,
T-shirt says,
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
from a local bookstore, free for audio listeners, it's freedom, but instead of FREE, it's FREA. So freedom. I think it's a very apropos T-shirt now for some of the things that are going on with, unfortunately, with
Oh
some
yeah.
of our books and like. So I like to wear this T-shirt sometimes when I'm on podcast or doing presentations and things. So yeah, I'd like to get access to the T-shirt you have. That'd be great.
My wife found them somewhere. I'll try to let you know where that was. But
Okay.
your T-shirt made me think about a thing I've heard many times over the years. For whatever it's worth, I teach college students, and so
I remember you referenced that on one of my prior listings to you. Yeah.
yeah. And so as I tell them, people who don't read have no advantage over people who can't read. And so, reading is the closest thing to a superpower that most of us have, and I'm
Yeah,
encouraged to take
yeah.
advantage.
And I think to build on that a little bit, people that don't read, you have audio books. If there's a way that you can get some other people's ideas into your head and just take pleasure in the they've put together, I think that's testimony, and I treasure other authors. And it's impossible to read the 4 million books that were published each year. How would we ever do that? But there's certainly other ways to get pieces and bits and pieces, and just got to book at a time and go for it. That's it.
Indeed. Well, Kevin, I'm looking at the clock and I'm realizing regular listeners to the show know this. We have always aimed for half an hour. I don't think I've ever done one that was just a half an hour. There's always more to talk about. But we want to respect people's time. So if you can hang out in the green room for just a moment so that I can properly thank you after we get off the air, I'll tell folks about what's coming up next week. And thank you for being with us.
Oh, yeah, and thank you for having that running commentary about how to get a hold of me at KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com, and I know that'll be in the show notes as well. Go to that website, way to leave their email and contact me, and I'm available, and I have a newsletter that comes out. So once they sign up on my website, they'll get access to my newsletter that usually comes out once a week. So
okay, very good. And I tend to forget that the crawl down there doesn't show to the audio listeners. So just one more time to say for those folks, KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com. And I think there's nothing unusual in the way Kevin or O'Connor is spelled. But it will be.
O'Connor is always spelled O-R at the end. Just be sure it's Kevin O'Connor.
That's right. That is a variation.
Some people spell O'Connor E-R, but that won't get you to my website.
That's true. And you can always find the link at confidencecultivators.com. That's where the show will be housed. So all of those links, we've shared some here, but there's Facebook and there's some Instagram and all those kind of things. You'll get those in the show notes as well.
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll be right back with you in just a second. Okay. And so, folks, once again, fascinating conversation here. I relate to so much of what Kevin is talking about. You can't live this long without having experiences. And I want to encourage the listeners here to think about your own experiences in these kind of terms. People tend to take their own experiences for granted. And it is through our most unique experiences that we connect with each other on the most universal level. So keep that in mind. We are here on the Alignment Show aiming to help you live your values and value your life, as we frequently say. Looking to next week, there's no relationship here. It happens our guest next week will be Deborah Keevan. She spells her last name the same way as Kevin, but we've got a lot of Kevins coming up here. But Deborah Keevan is the founder and chief inspiration officer of Highlander Press. And so just like Kevin was talking about with writing and the importance of books, Deborah loves helping change makers tap into and share their stories of healing and truth with impactful books. So that's going to be another fascinating conversation here on the Alignment Show. Be sure and keep an eye on the calendar. Watch for that next week. You can always catch the replays, of course, but we like to have people here live when we can, just for the interaction. In any case, we will look forward to seeing you next week on The Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, Take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.